Welcome to Gutsy Talks. I'm Rachel Larson, your host, naturopath and nutritionist, and I'm here to have real, honest conversations that can help you heal your gut, calm your mind, and fall back in love with food. Together with leading health experts, we'll dive into all things gut health and explore the deep connections between your gut and overall well-being, so you can feel empowered to take control of your health and live your best life. If you love all things gut health, follow me for more on Instagram at rachel.larson or head to rachellarson.com.au. Now, let's get into today's episode. All right, welcome to the very first episodes of Gutsy Talks. I'm thrilled to kick off things with an important conversation about a deeply overlooked connection, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, and endometriosis. Today, joining me is Karen Saunders, the women's naturopath, a degree qualified naturopath with over 8 years of clinical experience. She's on a mission to help women uncover the root cause of their hormonal and digestive issues through nutrition, herbal medicine, and lifestyle changes. She has already helped thousands reclaim vibrant health. I literally got chills. She's also a fierce advocate for better healthcare, research and education on conditions like endometriosis, PCOS, fertility, and gut health, because when it comes to your body, there is a better way. So hello, Karen, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Rach, and I'm so honored to be your first guest.
I know,
And
me too.
I know we always have really good conversations, and sometimes when we actually go for a coffee or something, this is how we actually talk. We geek out on these subjects. So
Yeah, we're nerds finally sharing it with the world. But, this topic couldn't be more important. I know that you and I face it so much in our own clinics. So to really get into the nitty-gritty of what this is, like, it needs to be told because it's affecting more people than what is currently recognized. And I did want to ask you, as one of our first questions, like, what actually brought you into naturopathy? What brought you into this field and kind of niching down into this, like, women's gut health kind of niche?
mm, that's such a good question, and I'll keep it short because it's a long journey how I got into naturopathy. I basically only found it in my late 20s
Mm,
after hiking in India and falling over, and somebody used some plant medicine on me,
really?
locals, and I was like, what? Plants heal? That's the first time. I've always been a nature girl. And then I moved to Australia and discovered that you can actually study a degree in the subject. And it was just like a full body yes, and I enjoyed every moment of it.
Amazing.
And haven't looked back since. It's completely changed my life and given me a lot of purpose.
Mm,
How did I get into gut health and hormones? Well, I kind of started actually started in clinic when
mm,
I had a special interest in vaginal
hmm
health,
hmm
vaginal conditions, because I myself was suffering with some recurrent candidiasis or thrush, and yeah, it just kind of grew from there.
Yeah.
And then after studying, I kind of ended up in an integrative gut clinic where I heard the word SIBO for the first time and a multitude of things. And I was just like, wow, I'm going to go into the gut. And
Yes.
then, yeah, and then my second kind of apprenticeship, I guess, was with an amazing mentor and naturopath, Miranda Miles, and she's got this incredible breadth of knowledge
Mm,
on women's health and hormones. And really, that's where I discovered, my love of the interplay of hormones. And she would just left, right, and center be talking to her clients about endo. And I remember thinking at the beginning, surely it's not another one. Like
yes.
everybody got endo. And I remember thinking, can't be that, prevalent.
Mm,
The longer I'm in clinic, the more I'm like, wow, that's the first thing I'm going to think when there's things
mm,
like even bloating or any sort of pelvic pain, heavy periods. And these are not, not all endo
for
sufferers
sure. For
get
sure.
all of these. But sometimes there's not a lot of pain and just infertility or like inability to fall pregnant. Sometimes it's just actually IBS or bloating.
Mm,
Kind of got to look at the whole picture and take a really good case history in order to understand. And sometimes the pennies just drop. Like I've had a client who just had chronic bloating. Just
yes.
we just couldn't get. You must, yeah, you
I'm
probably,
like,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Tell me about it.
And you've tried everything.
Yeah.
You've tested the SIBO, you've done like the stool testing, you've tried everything. You're
Yeah.
like, it's the biles of the food, blah, blah, blah. Nothing. And then eventually it's like, well, this is a real client I had last year. I was like, let's just do some endo investigation, sent her off to a,
Mm,
proper specialist in the area. And it turns out there was endo there, but she wasn't getting painful periods. She was actually really healthy, had a really great diet.
yeah.
I think mask.
And I think you bring up such a good point that there is such an overlap in symptoms at times. But before we even go into, I guess, that which you've already explained, but like, can we just really pare it back? Like, what is endometriosis? I think there's a lot of misinformation about what it is, being like an estrogen condition, where I feel like it's too reductive. It's a little bit inaccurate. It's kind of not actually correct. So can we just break it down, like what is endometriosis? And also, given that we will be talking about SIBO, what is SIBO?
Mm. Well, endometriosis, I almost think it gets more complex as we get to know more, but
Yes.
it's the presence of endometrial-like tissue in other parts of the body. So cells of the uterine lining, the
Mm.
endometrial lining, are found outside the body, and this could be pretty much anywhere. It could be in the pelvic cavity, along the kidneys, along the bowel, which is where there's a lot
Yes.
of gut issues. It could be absolutely anywhere, heart, brain. And it's also, I think, important to know that it does occur in men, boys,
Wow.
girls, mostly those
Yes.
female.
Yes.
And that's probably due to the fact that there is an estrogen component to
Mm.
it. And estrogen can make the condition worse. And even the endometrial lesions themselves can have their own estrogen producing environment.
It's
So,
like they kind of fuel themselves in a way.
like fuel on the fire.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's essentially what endometriosis is. And obviously those tissues in a cyclical manner will start to shed and cause, inflammatory and oxidative stress in the body.
So it's not just estrogen, even though there's a clear component to that. There's a lot of inflammation and immune dysfunction, and we're going to get into
Mhm.
gut links to that as well. But it's a lot more complex than if you have estrogen, then you have endo. Like there's just, it's, as you said, it's more complex the more we're learning about it.
Yes, exactly.
And so, like, what is SIBO? Like, we talk about it all the time, but it still surprises me that it is brand new information to people, and it needs to be known. So, like, what's SIBO?
Mhm. Well, you're the queen of SIBO. Yeah.
I'll give you the space.
Told me everything I know. You and Narala. So SIBO is when there's some bacteria caught in, I mean, this is a very basic kind of,
Mm,
you know, definition, but SIBO is bacteria that shouldn't be there in the small intestine. And it's caught there for whatever reason, the small intestine isn't moving properly.
mm,
And there you have an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine. And this is not necessarily parasites,
yeah.
it's just an overgrowth of bacteria for various reasons that we know.
Mm.
And endo can be one of those reasons that the small intestine isn't moving properly.
For sure, because people think that like a healthier gut has more bacteria, so the more the better. But this isn't true for the small intestinal area. So it's important to discern that the small and large intestines are different areas. And while we will be talking about the large intestine, the small intestine is in fact a different part of the gut, and it shouldn't have millions of bacteria in there. It's just not quite made for that. And so, what really is the link? I know that there's many links, but like, what is the link between endo and SIBO? Like, is it a chicken and egg thing? Like, what caused what? Like, how are these two kind of feeding and fueling and working, I guess, with each other in a weird way?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and it's a really broad question. And just
Mm,
further to what you were saying about the small intestine not being built to house a lot of bacteria. Yes, there's some bacteria in the
mm,
small intestine, but the large intestine really is built to kind of stretch with the gas production. So what happens with SIBO is that there's bacteria caught in the small intestine. They ferment the fibers that you eat and produce gases and can cause that uncomfortable bloating and gas and constipation,
mm.
diarrhea issues, and this can damage the lining of the small intestine, as well as this happens in the large intestine too. We can get something called intestinal hyperpermeability, which is, most people will know it as leaky gut,
Yep.
which just means that there's inflammation in the gut for a number of reasons, which we'll probably go into. But when there's inflammation in the gut, the in a very basic way to explain it is that the gut lining almost expands
Yep.
and allows toxins and other debris that might not normally go into the bloodstream go into the bloodstream and even like leak into the pelvic cavity or
Right.
the
Yes.
peritoneal cavity.
Mm.
And these toxins, for example, like LPS, like a lipopolysaccharide, is a really toxic inflammatory substance. So when those leak in there or into the bloodstream, not only does it cause like a massive inflammatory immune reaction because the
Mm.
body's like, oh, we've got to, get rid of these invaders, quick mount an immune response,
Yep.
but it causes a masses of inflammation as well. I kind of liken it to pouring fuel on the fire that's already inflamed because we know these endometrial lesions will become inflamed and painful, and the whole environment is like an inflamed soup. So
Yes.
the bacterial toxins are the last thing that we need. So by strengthening the gut, healing that leaky gut, reducing inflammation, and, improving the microbial balance, whether it's via treating SIBO or in the large
Mm.
intestine, that really helps to calm the situation. And I'm sure we'll talk about immune in the future and how important that is.
Absolutely. And that's like, I think that was just said so well because it's like we've got this dysbiosis in the small intestine. We likely have a leaky gut. This leaky gut is allowing all of these toxins, like LPS, like you described, to basically go wherever it wants. And, it can sometimes be down to the lesions that are already inflamed. And like it's just this fuel on the fire is just a perfect example. And you spoke about before we were talking about SIBO that like there's might be adhesions or inability to, I guess, things that are stopping the small intestine from moving properly. And so, like, is that the link that we need to be looking at in terms of how maybe endo is causing or contributing SIBO? Like, is that the tie? Is there anything else? And explain that if that is it.
Yeah, yeah. Good question. It's similar to that client that I had last year. It was
Hmm.
absolutely her undiagnosed endo, which even diagnosed endo obviously can cause things called lesions, adhesion,
Yeah.
which is basically scar tissue where organs will stick to other organs and they're not able to move freely. And the bowel is absolutely implicated in this. There's 5 meters of small intestine that endo can adhere to and inhibit the small
Mm,
intestine from moving properly and clearing itself properly from the normal amounts of bacteria that may be passing through, so they get stuck and
mm.
they cause that environment of bloating. And the other thing to mention is even surgery, any surgeries or trauma to the area can obviously
Yes.
cause the SIBO to be there and remain there. But things like a laparoscopy, which is the gold standard diagnostic tool
Mm,
that we use to diagnose endo, if it's not able to be seen on a scan. Any sort of surgeries, laparoscopies, where they go in via keyhole surgery and remove the lesions, can actually cause damage to the organs of, the peritoneal cavity, including the gut,
mm.
and affecting the way it works. And that's why, I just want to say at this point, it's really important if you are going to go for laparoscopy to choose a surgeon who's done thousands of surgeries and they're an advanced trained excision specialist, because that makes all the difference, not only with, avoiding damage to the gut, but also getting a really good laparoscopy that can help the endo from progressing.
Mm. And I like you mentioned about like having like the real like we want like the gold star surgeons for this. We don't want like we want people that are so well versed in this that they understand and they treat it with the delicacy that it needs to be because the irony is you're trying to fix one problem in terms of reduce like get a diagnosis, remove lesions, and in the process if it's not done correctly you can create a whole other gamut of problems, adhesions, scarring, which, as you said, has its own issues. So, like, we don't want to trade one issue for another. We need to be working with really good surgeons. And so, in your clinic, that is something that obviously you help people find and contact. Like, you're wanting them to be like, let's go
Yeah.
to the best. Like, we don't want run of the mill stuff here.
Exactly. And I think for somebody with endometriosis, it's important to have, like, one of the first steps is like to get a team together.
Yeah.
Yeah, like your medical team, and that often will comprise of like a really good, advanced trained excision specialist.
Hmm.
Never ablation. Ablation is when you burn
Yes.
off the lesion, and that's quite damaging. And yeah, excision is where they go in and just, excise or cut out very, very carefully. So, that's always going to be important. And even if you don't want to have surgery, at least getting that specialist who can help diagnose, maybe it's through an internal ultrasound.
Mm.
Technology is, moving along really well. Yes.
Before we get into that, because I know that's very exciting, but like, this technology is progressing, but like at the moment, how long does it take for someone to get a diagnosis? Like, what is the average length of time that it will take a woman to
Yes.
find out this diagnosis?
That's a good question. And that's why sometimes when I'm using language like endometriosis, I'm just going to say pelvic pain because there's so many people with
Yes.
undiagnosed endometriosis. And the sad thing is that around 190 million women, mostly women worldwide, will have
Oh gosh,
endo, which is 10% stat, which is kind of crazy.
that's a
And
lot.
yeah, it can take still up to 7 to 10 years to get diagnosed because these people are systematically dismissed and
Hmm.
unsupported, and the condition in its breadth is not understood. So a lot of these women are going into sometimes ER multiple times, back and forth to the doctor, just given pain relief or offered the pill,
Yep.
dismissed the amount of pain that they're in. It's just not understood, and they feel alone and dismissed. And this is still in 2025. So that's why talking about this on your podcast is so important, because I think a lot of people with bloating and IBS might also just have undiagnosed endo, because the overlap is crazy. In my clinic, I'm going to say conservatively 95% of my endo sufferers will have gut issues, and I'm talking IBS or
Yeah.
SIBO, definitely leaky gut. The official stat is 90%. I think it's higher, that overlap, that gut.
Huge.
So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
so we can't think of these things as separate issues. Like we can't be reductionists in this. This is why holistic health A gets results, but B, it's actually the most important, it's the most sensible way to be looking at the body because these issues aren't separate. They are feeding and talking to each other. I wanted to definitely touch on like how long it takes for a diagnosis, but there is developments in the endometriosis assessment diagnosis world. So like, can you talk a bit more about that?
Well, I don't know much about it.
Hmm.
I think about 2 weeks ago, there's been a new blood test
Hmm.
kind of created by a lab in Australia, I believe, where there's a lot of endo research coming out of Australia, which was really
Yeah.
impressive. And we also have incredible surgeons, yeah. So we're very lucky. Some of the study design might have some flaws, and there's some
Yep.
financial, interests in that, of course. But
Yes.
the stats that are coming out of it is that there'll be a blood test, and we're just taking blood at a lab, and that's around, I think it's 90 or 90% positive for moderate to severe endo. But watch this space.
Hmm.
Even this year it could be released, but it'll be very interesting to see how that develops and the accuracy. So in the endo space, we really need a more less invasive way of diagnosing
Yep.
the issue, because that's why it's taking people so long, because not always wanting to go under and get keyhole surgery just to diagnose, but to be honest, the prevalence, I would say more than often than not, it's actually warranted.
Yes. Yeah, and I think like reducing that barrier to understanding or warranting, like I guess, because sometimes a laparoscopy, you're using it not to diagnose but treat, but if you can get a sense of, or, really good assumption, almost not guaranteed, but you know what I mean? Like it's a very likely that you do have endo, then
Yes.
that surgery becomes more like it feels like, okay, this is what I need to do. Because surgery, like, it's not something that we should be taking lightly. It's incredibly important, particularly for this situation, but like we don't wake up on a Monday morning and think, I feel like getting a surgery today. Like it's a big choice. Yeah.
Exactly. And sometimes, especially if there's bowel involvement, like
Yeah.
more like deep infiltrating endo around the pouch of Douglas, like really deep inside and around the rectum and stuff, we'll need to get a colorectal surgeon involved as well. So then you have
Mm.
your endo surgeon and the colorectal surgeon, and having to coordinate all of that, and the
Yeah.
financial uh,
Yes.
repercussions that come with that are huge. And so some people are on wait lists for a year or 2 years if they can't do private, which
Yeah.
is why it becomes more important to manage the things that we can control, like that inflammatory gut leaky gut or, dysbiosis or SIBO, and
Mm.
getting the diet and the lifestyle things right, which can actually help so much. And,
Yeah. And 2 years is a long time to, to not have that level of care or diagnosis. That's a long time to be living with those symptoms. And you've touched on it, and that's where I'd love to go now is in terms of treatments, like from your perspective, being in this holistic naturopathic perspective, what do we need to consider? I mean, I feel like we could be naming like everything and everything, but I guess that's the beauty of holistic medicine is that we can choose lots of things. But like, what do we need to be doing if we think we've got endo or SIBO? Like, where do we start?
Yes. Well, I think anybody with pelvic pain, no, pelvic pain or period pain is not normal.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
some discomfort and some fatigue before your period is normal. But if you're getting more than that, if you're getting heavier periods, more than 80 to 120 mils of blood every month, like which is actually like that's not a lot if you put it in a cup.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
how does that measure, like, in terms of pads, tampons, menstrual cups?
Yeah.
Like, what does that kind of look like?
Well, small tampons usually 5 mils, larger tampon 10. Cups vary between
Mm,
15 and 20 depending on the size, but and then period undies they make it a little bit more difficult to
yes. Yeah.
um but if you're having to change your tampon or your cup every few hours,
Yeah.
and you're flooding through that or you're flooding overnight or you might not even get a heavy period with endo, but
Yeah. One thing to look out for. Yeah. So some with pelvic pain, like what are you starting to work with? What are the treatments we're considering?
um treatments. So I think well, you asked about like the important first steps to take, and that
Mm,
to search out a list of recommended surgeons in your area, and I'm happy if anybody wants to email me and or DM me and ask for the list.
we
uh,
and we will put that contact
yeah,
information in the
that's
show notes for
really
sure.
just to get on somebody's radar. It doesn't mean you need a laparoscopy,
Yeah.
but just getting that diagnosis can be really important. Sometimes you can get it through blood, sometimes through ultrasound if you're lucky.
Hmm.
And the same with SIBO, like you can test that. You can do a
Yeah.
breath test. So if you're getting any bloating, our classic SIBO symptoms would be, IBS-like symptoms. So you're bloating, especially after you eat, especially
Yep.
after healthy foods with fiber like veggies, you think you're doing the right thing and you're bloating, gassy, you could have constipation. Constipation's a really big one with endo and SIBO. Could be loose or diarrhea or like the mix of the both.
Yeah.
And then maybe you're
Foods that aren't predictable, pretty
yeah,
much.
unpredictable periods. Yeah, so then collecting food intolerances, and yeah, any sort of gut symptoms, I think.
Mm.
Fatigue is a big one. So, I mean, there's a lot of women or people that will be experiencing that. So
Yeah.
getting that diagnosed is important.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, treatment, it comes down to like the breadth of
Mm.
the contributing factors to endo. So I would say number one is gut health
Yeah.
comes to endo. There's also environmental toxins, so that's an easy one to kind of like, well, it's not easy, but there are so many things that you can do to mitigate, like plastics are a big one that will mimic estrogen and cause havoc. No heating and
Yeah.
plastic wraps. All of the products these days, I shudder sometimes to,
Like beauty and
yeah,
like all those things. Yep. Yep.
I love a makeup tutorial.
Yeah.
You do as well. You got me onto
Yeah,
them.
it's a guilty pleasure.
No, I don't even do a lot of makeup. But the amount of, you know, like
And
co-
endocrine disrupting chemicals and those types of
chemicals.
things.
So try and go natural. Like there are ways, all the household stuff. So that's one element, get a water filter and all of that. But the other thing that I would say, there's a genetic, contributing factor, epigenetics, like stress and all that. But gut is really something that's so fundamental, and we have so many tools for the gut. We have
Mm.
tests for the gut. That's really coming along, and we have all these incredible tools, diet, and as this is something that we can heal, we can, fix and rebalance.
The
And
gut can, I mean, the body can heal itself. Like we cut ourselves with a knife, it heals itself. Like we just need to give it the space to do that. And I totally agree with you. I think the first step to a solid and successful plan is knowing what you're working with. We need the tests.
Mm,
Otherwise, we're flying blind and where you're doing the guessing game, which is in the long run, it is way more expensive because it's
yeah.
time, money, energy, effort that you're potentially throwing in the wind. So I do think testing is the first step to a really comprehensive plan. But I love what you mentioned about the environmental stuff. That is things that people can start switching out as they finish their bottle, or they can throw it out straight away. But like finish your
Yeah.
bottle if you're like, I can't just throw this money down the drain. Like start
Yeah.
switching out all of those things. You mentioned diet, and that is something which is really accessible to us because supplements we know need to be tailored to the information we have and the person. But like if we could generalize some dietary things that people could start including in their diet that is working for both their hormones and their gut, like
Mm.
what springs to mind?
Well, I guess before we jump into that, like it's important to I guess acknowledge that we've already mentioned this, but I really want to hone in is that endo is not just an estrogen hormonal condition. It is
Yes.
in its nature inflammatory
Hmm.
condition, and
Yeah.
it's characterized by massive immune dysfunction too. And so it's really important to acknowledge as well that the gut really is an important seat and base and foundation of our immune health and ability to modulate our immune system. And also, it can be a massive inflammatory pool. So, whatever's happening in the gut is happening in the rest of the body. So,
Yeah.
often you might find if there's leaky gut, you'll be talking about all of these subjects, I'm sure, is like it could be, skin issues or psoriasis or histamine intolerance is a huge one because that's linked with estrogen. But by, healing the gut with diet, lifestyle, and specific nutrients, we really stabilize the immune system and reduce that inflammatory load. So it doesn't mean that endo goes away. Sure, like I'm never going to say anything's impossible,
Yeah.
but it really helps to quell everything. So yeah, as you said,
Mm.
there's many ways to go about it, and it's really person specific, and that's why working one on one is so good. There's definitely some things that I might tell most of my endo sufferers, because they always have gut stuff too.
Yes.
It's like an anti-inflammatory diet is going to
Yeah.
be really important, and there's no way around it. Like I would like to say, like, it doesn't mean that you need to be perfect 100% of the time,
Yeah.
but it means that in general, 80% of the time you need to be eating anti-inflammatory. And to me, that's, cutting out inflammatory foods is number one. So gluten, I know the research, maybe you know better than me. I haven't looked into the gluten research, but gluten research hasn't caught up with this, but clinically,
Yes.
I see, cutting out gluten to be really beneficial from an inflammatory perspective. I think I have had, I think I've seen 6,000 people in my clinic, and nearly all of them get a bit of a gluten detox for a few
Yeah.
weeks. And I've only had like one or two come back and go, nah, it didn't make any difference at all.
Yeah.
I know clinically that makes a big difference. And, you know, people with endometriosis will probably do well without dairy.
Hmm. Is
Um,
that all types of dairy, or is that like, can you
yeah.
have goats and sheeps, or is it just a, or is it, I guess it probably is a bit more person specific, but just for someone reading that might be wondering, listening, that might be wondering to that, is there a difference between like
Yeah.
goats, sheeps, and cows?
Yes, good. Yes, there is definitely. And so I'm predominantly talking about cow's dairy here. And you might even want to just do a det like a 4-week detox from it and then introduce certain types of dairy in.
And
So,
just see how
and
you
then
go.
see how you go. But
Yeah.
generally with endo, it can be just a bit more inflammatory. So you might be safer with like goat's cheese or sheep's
Mm.
milk or goat's milk, yogurt, those kinds of products. Or maybe at a push, like harder fermented cheeses or buffalo, is it mozzarella?
Yep. Yep.
Things like that. Like the milky cheeses are a massive no, like yeah, milky dairy. So like
Yes.
milk, ice cream, soft cheese, are the
The
worst.
harder ones, like the
Yeah.
parmesan and those types of things are a little bit better
Yeah.
slash different. Interesting.
Don't go and change to oat milk because that's no good, everybody. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But actually, you can make your own oat milk very easily. Like, it might not froth, but I think it's when it's kind of processed with a lot of like the sunflower oils and that kind of thing. It's not
So
great.
especially those like barista milks, which has
Mhm.
got a lot of those thickeners and additives and oils for the
Yeah.
consistency. Yeah, so that's interesting because, people would be looking for alternatives. So would potentially like some of the like homemade may be the best, but if not, would something like soy milk or almond milk or macadamia milk, like how do
Yeah.
they fare just in terms of I guess dairy alternatives?
Yeah. I think the best thing, look, there's no perfect
Yeah.
milk, it's worth saying. And not to knock dairy because dairy is a healthy product.
Yes. Yes.
But I tend to say just look, alternate. Like
Yeah.
soy, tolerate soy, whole soy is one of my key interventions for any estrogen condition. But some people, you might know more about this from a gut perspective, won't tolerate soy, and that's just it. So then alternate, do a bit of
Yeah.
almond, do, some coconut, make, just see what works, and then don't have too much of it.
I just think that's a great rule for life because, we just, first of all, we want variety and diversity in our diet, but like there is the saying, too much of a good thing. Like it is a saying for a reason. It stood the test of time.
Yeah.
If we can like offset some of the pros and cons for another milk, then it tends to not be such a big issue. So I think that's like really sensible advice. Just kind of change it up, and that way you don't have to like be stressed that you're having too much almond milk because you're actually going between.
Yeah.
You mentioned as well soy, which is has an interesting dynamic with estrogen. It is highly misunderstood. So can we please clear this up because there's fear around soy and there
Mm.
for most people probably shouldn't be. So like what's the go with soy?
Yes. Before we do that, I just want to touch on a couple of the like other inflammatory things.
Definitely. Yep.
Alcohol, sugar, caffeine, try and avoid those as much as possible as
Yeah.
well. So, yeah, soy is a really interesting one. And look, there's some people that from a gut perspective just don't tolerate it for some reason. It could also be the type of soy that you're eating. So, whole soy protein isolate, which is like processed soy found in, like the protein bars and that kind of thing. I would always avoid that. So, what is very healthful is whole soy. So, whole soy, whether you're using it, I love cooking soybeans, the
Hmm.
chips, and adding them to salads or stews or whatever. This is whole soy, and things like tempeh or tofu, they use this whole soybean. So, this is a lot, we're talking like this is the medicinal properties because it contains something called phytoestrogens, which can kind of act like weak estrogens and help to balance the estrogen environment. And the interesting about soy as well, it contains a lot of protein and fiber, which is so important for that gut microbiome. But also, soy can convert into a really potent phytoestrogen called equal, but
Hmm.
actually it takes gut bacteria, specific gut bacteria, to do it, which not everybody has.
Mm.
But the more soy you eat, the more you upregulate this gut bacteria if you have it. I think that's why the Japanese have got such a low rate of cancers,
Yeah.
um, because yeah, that can help, create this very healthy estrogen balance in the body and moderate some of these, estrogen dependent conditions. Um, and I think that's the beautiful thing about the gut microbiome and the estrobolome.
Yeah.
We've just kind of come across in the last 10 years, which I think is an interesting
Yeah,
subject.
estrobolome is definitely probably a new word for many people, but it's
Yeah.
basically like that estrogen interaction or that estrogen part of our microbiome in terms of all of that. Just for people that are like, what did Karen say? Like, it's a new word for many
Blah, blah,
people.
blah.
So I was going to say, one of my other ways that I love getting in whole soy tofu and tempeh, great options. Edamame people have when they go out have sushi, like, or, great. Even just making, you might make hummus, but you can make it with like, I guess a hummus, quote unquote, with soybeans. So like there's all these different ways that you can actually get soy in your diet if,
Yeah.
if that's what you're wanting to do and if you can tolerate it and all those types of
It's a
things.
little, like, no offense, soy. I have deep respect for soy. It's a little bland, let's be honest. So learn how to cook it, learn how to flavor it. And one of my favorite ways of getting in soy is like silken tofu chocolate mousse. So if
Ooh.
anybody wants that recipe, let me know. or you can
Again,
call it.
show notes, people will be like running to
Yeah,
because that
yeah,
sounds pretty delicious. And, we all love a dessert that kind of works for us in terms of like whatever health goal that we're working with. Like that sounds pretty good to me.
yeah. Actually, quite great, actually.
Prebiotics, are there any types of foods like polyphenols, anything else that we should be having in our diet? And if
Mm.
so, like what are some foods and how they kind of work?
Yeah, good question. So I think actually soy isoflavones, that kind of phytoestrogen component,
Mm,
type of polyphenol. So a polyphenol is like almost like a blanket term for multitude of plant molecules that have beneficial effect in the gut. So I remember studying nutrition and just starting, you just think that veggies and fruits and things like that, they just have vitamins and minerals and protein and carb. But
yeah.
actually plants have this plethora, thousands and thousands of, molecules, and they all have different benefits. We evolved with plants,
Mm,
you know.
mm,
So polyphenols is a large family of beneficial compounds that they help to modulate the gut bacteria. So
yeah.
by that I mean they can really promote the growth of beneficial bacteria by giving them kind of the foods that they like to eat. Can actually reduce some of the more negative bacteria and like
Mm,
things like pomegranate,
love
um,
those.
seeds, pomegranate juice, green tea, dark berries,
Yeah.
any sort of very pigmented foods will have things like this. They're very strongly anti-inflammatory and provide a lot of antioxidants. So those are the two key words we've used a lot. So we want,
Yeah.
anti-inflammatory and antioxidant support. And not only that, it provides a lot of prebiotic fiber, around, that's why it's good to eat whole foods, because not only do you get like the polyphenols and the vitamins and the minerals and the protein, but you get all that lovely fiber as well. So
Mm.
taking
And I
supplements.
think, for the most part, a lot of those polyphenol foods that you mentioned, a lot of them are actually kind of SIBO friendly as well, like
Oh,
berries and pomegranate and green tea. Like they are, for the most part, well tolerated from a gut perspective. So if you're having berries in the morning, like try different berries, have more berries, add in some green tea, hot or cold, throw some
mhm.
pomegranate in there. Like there's lots you can do that,
Yeah.
and this is where the overlap is because there's a great overlap in what we're using food as medicine for both of these conditions.
Yes, exactly. And would you say it's important to also I would say it's important to treat the SIBO, get that diagnosis and treat the SIBO alongside like the diet stuff as well, because that can make such a
Yeah.
difference in that the bacterial element of endo.
Yeah, they like we've said, like they feed each other. Like you do want to know if they're both there, and I think like you're saying, it's a matter of kind of seeing how they're connected and treating both at the same time because you can't really treat one without the other. Like you
Yeah,
can, but like you're not going to see the results because
yeah.
they're feeding each other. I think what we're speaking about is like knowing what you're working with,
Mm.
before you start treating, so you're not wasting time.
Yes.
So I guess like we may have already covered it, but I did want to ask you, I guess, as our final question, like if someone has like a gut feeling that
Mm.
they have endo, they have SIBO, they may have both, like what would your advice be to them?
Yeah. I think the most important thing is getting that team together that can help you, because Googling and trying to do it yourself is really confusing. And I think, not to knock the medical system, I think an integrative approach to endo management is incredibly important. So, but sometimes just using the medical system for something like endo falls short. So
Mm,
I think getting your team together, like an endo specialist, somebody that knows, like an allied health, whether it's a nutritionist or a naturopath, to help you with those gut issues if you already have those, is one of the most important things as well. So getting somebody that can carry out that testing
mm,
via bloods, could be genetics, it could be the gut testing, and somebody that can help you, figure out what foods are best for you and help you with that gut healing if that is a component. And I think, just doing those things will go a long way and at least help you feel more heard and empowered and not
mm,
so alone and more supported with a plan, because I know that what I've heard from a lot of my endo sufferers is that it's frustrating, it's lonely, they've gone through the ringer trying to understand what's going on in their body, why they're in pain and curled up on the floor in the toilet monthly. And, it's so sad. It doesn't need to be like that. So yeah, I think that would be my, place to start. If you have that feeling like something's not right, like this isn't normal.
Yeah, look, that couldn't be more solid advice. I think team care, like you've just said, is the power. Like, it's so powerful. And I love that. And I really hope that people are listening to that and take action to that. And I guess on that note, if you do want to connect with Karen, and book a one-on-one assessment, we will have all of her details in the show notes. So thank you so much, guest number one. I've had such a blast, and I'm sure we will be seeing you again and having more just empowering talk. But thank you so much, Karen.
Thanks, Rach. It's been fun.
Amazing. Thanks for tuning into Gutsy Talks. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired to take the next step in your gut health journey. If you're ready to dive deeper, head over to rachellarson.com.au. There's a range of courses and resources waiting for you. If you loved this episode, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with others who might benefit from this information. And so you don't miss out on future Gutsy Talks, be sure to hit follow and leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Rachel Larson, and I can't wait to connect with you again for our next Gutsy Talk.